Hopefully things are live. We're just gonna sort of dissemble and ramble here for just a moment while we wait for the monitor over there that's tracking this to see, because the YouTube studio was being a bit weird. It told me it was totally receiving my stream data, but then it wouldn't actually preview what would ultimately be live, which it normally does. Oh, there we go. Yay. Instead, it decided that it wanted to just show me my thumbnail, and I wasn't entirely unsure whether or not it was actually doing what a person might expect it to do. But it seems like that's all working, so that's good. I think they've been doing a little bit of manipulations behind the scenes on the studio experience and the live streaming experience. So there may be a little bit of different stuff happening in there. But hello, fellow Sublime Text Fanatics. OdatNurd here. Welcome to tonight's live stream. And the date, I'm going to guess November 4th. I'm not wearing my watch right now. It's in the charger in the room behind me back there. So we're just sort of winging it. Um, and I thought today was it'll be a good night to just sort of relax, chill, and work on some stuff. Good evening, Katrina. Welcome to the stream. Tonight we're going to be doing, I guess, more of what we were working on last week. In fact, I have some tweaks that I'd like to make to what I did last week. Over the intervening week, I changed my mind about how I wanted my little delete plugin to work. And there was also a question that was asked by someone on YouTube, generally speaking, about sending information to Terminus. I know that's something that I've done before, but I thought it would be fun to sort of work that again, specifically for the purposes of having a tab running and being able to send fragments of code to it. Possibly like a Sublime REPL type situation. I don't actually use that particular package, but maybe that's something that we could do. And then, otherwise just hang out, chill, have a good time, let the hours while away before it becomes bedtime. And headset's feeling a little itchy tonight, so probably it's enough dissembling. I think I'm reasonably assured that things are working the way one might expect them to here, despite the weirdness of the situation. Hello, Ashwin. You finally had your tea. What kind of tea do you drink usually? What's your go-to? And hello, Victor, as well. We're just about ready to jump into some random stuff, sort of a continuation of last week. Along with some sending some stuff to Terminus, perhaps, because this week's video on the other channel was about using Terminus, and there's actually some information to impart about that very thing as well. Oh, and before I do that, I'm just going to very quickly click a button here and verify. Boop, everything is cool over here. Seems groovy cool. All right, it is time to proceed. I'm going to press the button. I'm doing it. You can't stop me. Only my dexterity can stop me. My dexterity and my lack of remembering exactly which of the two buttons does the correct thing. Should probably label those better. I was just thinking earlier in the week or on the weekend that I have a control panel that I made myself to be able to communicate with OBS for the purposes of controlling the stream. And I'm using Node-RED to do it. And I was just thinking a couple of days ago. I don't entirely remember what all it was that I did with that, but I should probably look into that because I'm still on the lookout for the graphics for having a bug and such. Uh, and I need a way to be able to trigger those, but it's been so long since I set this thing up, I don't entirely remember how it works. I'm not even entirely sure which of the computers in here it's the server part of this is actually running on, to be perfectly honest. I'd have to dig around a little bit and see where this proxy is pointing. But in any case, hello, fellow Sublime Text Fanatics. OdatNurd here. We're going to do a little live stream stuff here. Now we're going to be continuing on. Whoops, pardon me. With the stuff that we were doing last week. If you recall, one of the things we did was the ability to delete a file and be prompted. And I did that with an input handler. But over the course of the week, I've been deciding that maybe I actually want that to be a quick panel after all, which is what the package where I was trying to replicate this does. Because quick panels have font stylings that we can do now, um, which I think might even be fixed in here. Let's see. If I pick this is a plugin that we created in a live stream a few weeks back, the infamous terrible audio live stream, I think. But the now that in these builds the secondary text down here can actually be HTML. I think we can. I don't think we can apply colors in there, but we can apply bolding and stuff. It seemed like that might be a nicer way to go. Also, because when we use the command palette, we don't really have the ability to do that. It has to use the preview area at the bottom. I kind of like this better. Of course, we can also shoot this kind information in here too, so that might be cool. And Ashwin says, I actually buy loose tea leaves and make tea. I'm not a foodie by any means, so no idea on the brand. Yeah, I brew loose tea myself as well, but I don't get whole tea leaves. Someone went to all of the whatever you do after you have the tea leaf to dry it and stuff. Somebody did that part for me, but I can totally spoon it out like nobody's business, and then I actually end up putting it in my own little disposable tea bag thing, just to stop it from floating around in the water too much. I do actually have a few different types of tea infusers, the kind where you put the water in and then when it's done, you can stick it on top of your mug and it drains out. Um, but those can be a bit of a bear to clean little tea leaves out of for some things. Pretty hep on my two go-to teas are Earl Grey and English breakfast tea. But I like all kinds, but those are the kind I go through the most. In fact, the last time I put in a tea order was about 3 months ago, and it took me less than a month and a half to go through a kilogram of assorted teas of both varieties. So, whoop, but yeah, I am by no means a foodie either. The coffee that I make is fresh ground in as much as I buy coffee beans and then I grind them in the grinder, but I don't grind them on a per cup basis because ain't nobody got time for that. I grind them up ahead of time. So, it's kind of six of one, half dozen of the other. But I get to have my own custom grind, so I guess I got that going on. Also, if you have your own coffee grinder and you're married, then your wife sort of expects you to use the coffee grinder to do stuff. One other thing that I did set up here, if I just swoop this over, is I totally installed the Dark Reader plugin. So uh, if we need to look at Python stuff, our eyes won't burn like we're staring directly into a solar eclipse, which don't do that. So thanks so much for the suggestion on that particular one. I believe it was Katrina that mentioned that one. Works quite well. I was very quite impressed with that. In fact, I kind of got startled while I was in the middle of setting up the live stream earlier. On my Mac here. Oops, I should probably drag that back in. It just suddenly synced all of my stuff into that copy of Chrome, and the pop-up just appeared out of nowhere while I was typing something. Scared the bejeebers out of me for a second. Oh, that whole situation where you do something and something completely coincidental happens somewhere else, and then you're sort of convinced that you had an effect on something. Um, where's my mouse cursor? All right, so I think let's create a little sample text. Oh, actually, I might actually even have. Boop. I have this file named delete me. I tend to do that sort of thing a lot. We might wonder what the heck this thing actually represents, and I'll be danged if I know, but I probably had a file open at some point. And it just needed to have something to delete, perhaps like this. So the file manager delete does this: send to trash, cancel, and the name of the file. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not entirely sure what that does. Oh, that's right. It does nothing. That's right. I guess it's there just to remind you what file it was that's actually being deleted. Um, eh. So that makes some sense in that regard. And the one that we created, if it's still in here, is this one where it's telling us the name of the file that we could delete right there, and then it's giving us these two options here. I don't know. I kind of like the idea of doing it in a quick panel just to be able to have um, this information directly underneath each item instead of at the bottom. I think because we could also potentially hack, if you will, the idea that this thing could have a kind information that ends up being the color that I like and with an icon of a stop sign, I think. Uh, I assume there's an octagon Unicode character. That might actually be something to look up before we start because that's kind of what got me to thinking that that would be a cool idea in the first place. Unicode octagon, is that a thing? Horizontal black octagon. This one. Whoops. I don't want an image, dude. I want to copy the character. Where's the character? Well, it doesn't seem particularly, this particular page, you might be able to see cast off on that monitor. In fact, browser test page. There we go. No, that's the image. Let's copy that. We'll just see if this particular font handles it. Command browse. Oh, it was just called browse, wasn't it? Window command. Let's do window command. If we swap this for yeah, well, that's not entirely hopeful, I will say. Yeah, that's not one that's going to work so good, huh? Well, that's a little bit of an unfortunate there. There's a lot of those things. I know I have done some stuff like this in the past. I wonder. I think list input handler should have a kind icon and annotation. Yeah, I'm sort of surprised that that's not there already. I think there was perhaps some discussion about something related to that on the Discord just recently, like this morning or late last night, regarding um, the idea that this has the kind information in it in the go to anything panel, but in Go, there's various things in here that have more stuff. Oh, I might also be thinking of an actual issue on the tracker as well, but I think it was just sort of discussed in both places. The idea of generating your own version of this that does some sort of filtering. But if you wanted to use it in the command palette, you would be able to do that, and it's kind of not possible anyway because there's no way to just grab a list of all of these symbols that are defined in a project. You can find all of the symbols in a view, and you can look up any symbol you want in the global project index, but only the core has access to the full list of all of the symbols in a project because there could be conceivably a lot of them, which I think was part of that discussion because there's something about namespaces in Go and how they show up in the list a bunch. And I think there was some discussions on how you might be able to filter the symbol list by kind, since that's not technically something that we can be doing right now. But let us try this one just to see. This will probably work. Whoops. Oh, come on, man. Whoops. Just to verify with myself, because the last time I did anything like this was quite a ways back. You're thinking, oh yeah, thinking of symbol transforms that's slowly being removed. Yeah, and I think that's what originally came up with that. I think it was all about Go and how it's harder to find things in there now. And Will's point was that the new kind information makes that easier. But I think I might be conflating that in addition to there's a discussion going on in an issue in the tracker about the same sort of thing, sort of replicating your own. I kind of get this. I have the suspicion that maybe some more API might be provided, or they might provide some sort of extra filtering for something like that. So that totally works. I'm kind of surprised that the octagon doesn't work for something like that. We could put a frowny face for delete to remind you that you might be sad if you delete it, but we will sort of pass on that one. This is also something, by the way, that I kind of want to throw into the scraps repository, um, because it's a handy thing to have. The difficulty with this is that whole to work in the newer builds of Sublime, you have to have the same package installed twice with slight differences. And I think I may have pointed this out previously, but in the stream where we made this, I pointed out that command classes have the name method. You generally don't override that, but you could if you wanted to, but I never really had a reason to do so except to say that I did. And then once the stream was over, I totally did that exact thing. So this command, the name of the command that this class generates is different depending on which plugin host it's running inside of. And if it runs inside of the 3.3 plugin host, when it gathers the list of commands, it just immediately runs the 3.8 version, which is the only way to gather the sets of commands from both plugin hosts, because otherwise you can only see one or the other and not both. It seems like this is a better way to do that than just having two commands in the command palette. If you want to browse for commands, you probably don't care where they are. And we could probably annotate this as well, now that I think of it, with what version of Python host it's actually running in. Can one make their own Unicode symbols? That's a good question. I mean, at some level, I imagine if you have, access to font tools, you can make a font display whatever you want. Probably only the Unicode Consortium has control over what's considered, you know, correct or complete or spect or what have you. But it's actually something that I fiddled with very briefly. I wonder. I don't have that. Do I have it? I do not. I think I may have moved it out. One of the things I did in last November was create a Sudoku that runs directly in Sublime. Um, my first idea for something like that was sort of like a dungeon crawl game, uh, where there would be a room and you could say what you want. Kind of like there's a board not a board game a tabletop RPG called Four Against Darkness, which is kind of like D&D that you play by yourself. I was actually going to make a version of that. So you go into a room and then there's a table for whether there's a monster or not, and then you fight with dice rolls and various rules, and then away you go. And I thought it would be fun to create a version of that particular game in Sublime. But in order to do that, it required having a font whose characters were squares that were room shapes, if you will. Actually, I think the way I originally uh, thought about it is if I could get a font where all the characters were squares and there was no padding around any of the characters, leading or kerning or anything, and there was every combination of characters, line on the top, line on the bottom, line on the left, line on the right, corner, corner, blah, 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 and actually square, not like standard extended ASCII drawing characters, then you could actually render like graph paper in the buffer and uh, simulate drawing on it with a pencil. But I was unable to find a font like that, and I spent a little bit of time working with a font editor and was unable to come up with anything that worked good because I'm not a font type person by any stretch. So I kind of left that one by the wayside. But that's also something that I have. That idea keeps coming back to me for the purposes of this year's November project. So again, if you have ideas for something that could conceivably be done or mostly done in roughly 31 or so hours, I could, or 31 ideas for distinct plugins that could be done in an hour or an hour and a half. I'm looking for ideas for this year's November project and seriously pondering the crazy, crazy idea of doing a live stream every single day in December. Um, let's continue back in with this thing here. I'm just going to quickly I did have share. Oh, that's right. Yes. We did want to do one other thing there. I'm going to very quickly pop up the package control page for Terminus. There we go. That's the one. This week's video on the alternate channel was about Terminus, and flip that button. I can drag it over here. Boop. Using it or solving some common problems, particularly shifting tabs around. Hello, Benjamin. It's going well so far. Haven't really got anything done yet. Doing a lot of talkity talk, but there's something. The video that I put out on the other channel was about using Terminus in a build system and getting it to. Well, actually, I guess the four questions that I get asked a lot. I mentioned in the video, but the Terminus videos on the channel are by far the most popular videos that I've put out over the last little while. So as a result of that, semi kind of cheating the system by putting another Terminus video out. But I get a lot of questions and comments and in private messages and stuff about people using Terminus. And one of the problems that they have is constantly getting tabs building up if you use it in a build system. So want to be able to use those, want to be able to put it to the side and reuse tabs in that context. So that's why that video was what it was. And it turns out if you're a person that's using one of the new builds, the solution to moving a tab to the right and keeping it there works differently for you if you're using one of the 4K builds than it does in Sublime 3, which I think there was something that was fixed in the new builds regarding focus changes or something. But essentially, it seems like even if you programmatically change the focus in some contexts by saying this file in this group, make it the focused group, it doesn't actually apply that focus. Maybe because it was async, not entirely sure. So it was a situation where I had worked out exactly what to do with that thing right inside of on this system here, and everything worked absolutely great. And I shuffled it over to the other computer, got logged in, got ready to go. I did a little dry run of what I was going to say, and boop, plugin does not work in Sublime 3 the way it does in Sublime 4. So uh, expect another video on that eventually. Someone's already asked me about it in private in the Discord. Um, but one of the questions that did come up from that, which is why I meandered off into that particular area, is you can obviously create Terminus things and run them, and we can use it in a build system. We can, oh wow, it's in here somewhere, man. Terminus close. Terminus send string to be able to send arbitrary text to a panel. Oh, and Ashwin says, I thought you were going to make a dependency for the Google OAuth library. I guess you had some issues with that. I've decided not to. Well, I mean, technically, I do have a dependency on that. If I look in here, there should be a boop. This is what I like to think of as a super dependency because it has this many things crammed inside of it for the purposes of my YouTube editor package, which kind of underscores why I try not to use dependencies where possible in a plugin. Like for example, now I would probably use pathlib if I was working in a plugin that I knew was going to run in the 3.8 host because it's readily available, but in 3.3 plugins, I never really went that route because I kind of want the code I write to just sort of natively work without having to install stuff because in my experience, it doesn't take long before dependencies on dependencies starts to spiral wildly out of control. And case in point, I needed Google API client, and as a result, there's this many things that are crammed in here. So I actually have this as a dependency, but I didn't publish it anywhere, partially because I'm not sure anybody actually cares, but mostly because dependencies are going to change how they work, imminently, I guess, if Will gets that part or when Will gets that part done. So I didn't really want to put too much time into trying to package that up. Plus, I don't know, I mean, I guess the license, I'd have to also check all the licenses on those to make sure that it's cool. But yeah, that's totally the thing that makes this thing able to do something. And what a giant pain in the butt it is. That reminds me, I totally need to add a spinner to that. But this is the link to the video that we were just talking about. Yeah, I post those things in enough questions that it seemed like there's a nice way to look it up. I actually want to modify that a little bit. I'd like to be able to have the search go through not just the titles, but also meta information, but I'm not entirely sure that's directly possible here. Terminus has this terminus send string, which you can use to send output to any terminal that you like. And someone asked me about the idea of having a split with a terminus shell running in one side. And I think in their example, it was PowerShell files that they were editing, and then wanting to select some, select some text and hit a key to shuffle it over to actually have something happen over there. Um, and I know I've done something like that on the forum before, but it was a little ways back, I think. It seemed like that might be sort of a fun thing to work out too, particularly because we were talking about tags in that particular video, and this is a nice way to direct this to a specific place should one like to do so. Um, for my own purposes, I do have PowerShell here, but I don't really know squat about PowerShell. And why do I have? Did I create an empty window there? I guess I must have. I don't even remember that particular thing. But it seems like that would be a fun thing to work on as well. So probably do that. Whoops. Terminus close. Oh, look, I totally have a version of it here. Let's take a look at that and see what we did last time and see if we can extend it and modify it. My user package is a veritable wasteland of stuff that I need to fiddle with. Apparently, I have 39 modified files in there because I keep my I keep my user package in Git, and yeah, there's 39 things. So simplistically, the command that I put in that forum post was uh, this one here, which is run the send string command with the selection that is currently in the buffer to the item terminal with the specific tag. And one of the problems he said that he was having is he could send data to it, but he couldn't make it run it, which seemed kind of unclear um, for the purposes of how to if it seems like if you knew how to send stuff directly to the terminal, you'd be able to execute it too because you just send a new line. So that seemed kind of confusing. Oh, and this one is trying to do it in a panel as well. So that is interesting. Do I have I do a control enter. Let's bring this one up to the top where we can look at it more. We can see in the relative oops, stop that. The relative scheme of how far down in random commented out key bindings we are, how many different plugins that I've fiddled with. Some of these are even from other streams. Of course, this is the one that plays the Jeopardy theme if I have the appropriate MIDI stuff running. Which now that I think about it is something that I think was mentioned way back in that stream would be a fun thing to do when there's a bug. Start the Jeopardy theme playing and see if you can solve it before it finishes. Might have to revisit that along with the graphics for things. So this is saying that Control Enter sends the selection to terminus only if the selection isn't empty and there's one of them. Theoretically, that could be. There's arguments in here that don't technically need to be provided. This might actually, well, yeah. Just thinking for the purposes of his idea there. maybe we could make it cooler. Does anybody watching, do you have any experience using like Sublime REPL or other such packages? Uh, is there something that's specific to that package executing Python in a tab that's different than how Terminus does it? Because I've always wondered why people keep using Sublime REPL when they could be using Terminus, which is, for my money, easier to configure than Sublime REPL is. Um, but I don't know. I've always thought that working up a little bit of a plugin that would replicate that would probably be fun. So for example, that's doing a twofer. It's toggling the panel too, so we definitely don't want that. I assume what the guy was originally doing, we'll just leave that in there, was doing something in a panel. The person that originally asked for this particular thing. But that totally worked. So the question becomes, this automatically executes it because it's capturing the new line from the end of that line, but clearly it wouldn't if we selected this. And then you'd have to manually go over there and hit the key. So in a situation like this, would it make sense for this to always stick a new line on the end of that string if it didn't have one, or send a new line if there wasn't one? Or is it seem more, um, what's the word I'm thinking of, more usable and powerful if you can selectively say send this over and not execute it because you want to tweak it? Or should it also send the focus over there when it does it? Is something else to consider in that particular case. And I don't think there's a focus in here for that. If we look at all of the arguments that can be given to Terminus open, you can get it to focus there, but otherwise you'd have to have a tag on it or find it by name. And I'm guessing finding it by tag is probably where you want to go with something like that. What we're kind of working here is the content for a future video. So this is kind of like a behind the scenes on how I come up with this sort of thing. Although to be fair, a lot of the plugins that I've done in videos thus far were ones that have been done as a result of people asking stuff on Stack Overflow and such. So yeah, let's say we're not necessarily interested in that aspect, but maybe we do want to send this to a specific tag. Now, I don't think that this is actually configured to have a tag. When that actually happens. I spent a lot of time looking at the Terminus core code. Oops. Say we look at, yeah, the tag defaults to none, and then it could theoretically come from a couple of different places, I think. Oh, maybe, oh, you actually have to specify it there. And yeah, so what you would have to do is, as a full step for something like this, the first thing you'd have to do is edit your Terminus settings to add a specific one for something. So let's say, I am not a super fan of how it splorked these out, to be perfectly honest. I wonder. We would say something like this. The command for this, let's just sort of tighten this up, would be that. Oh, I guess I didn't need to do that way, did I? Or that way. And we say that this is Python. It is definitely not the default. Oops. It's enabled, doesn't need any environment. We'll call it Python. And yeah, well, I think if you don't specify this, it goes on all systems, but we can worry about that later. So if that was the case, we should be able to spawn, I believe, if we look at this, a terminal by just giving it that particular thing. You can use terminus open with config name and the name of the config to actually pull, and everything else should come from there, right? So if we did window run command terminus open, and then very quickly the argument was config name and this, we totally end up with the thing that we expect to see. And then the other thing to check is, that's over there, determining if there is a window that has a specific tag is also something that's important to this, because you probably want to spawn this thing if it doesn't already exist, right? And for the purposes of that, let's look at the terminus thing here. Terminus view.tag as a setting is something you can use to identify something, and then you can also bind it. So we could conceivably do something like, what? Whoa. V for v in window.views if v.settings.get terminus view dot. Didn't provide a tag in that, did I? Probably should have did that part too. Hang on. Name Python, yeah, but you totally want the tag to be Python. Whoops. Tag Python. So let's test this two ways and we can verify after we're all is said and done. I'm really confusing myself with that, but terminus view dot Python. So the answer to that is none, which makes sense because this isn't actually the correct window. This is the part where I wish that the information from that was visible in other windows. Mostly I don't want it to be, but every now and then I do. So it doesn't work here, but if I did that, what's the actual command? It's so often that I don't actually use that one. Open in tab. Now that I did that, still no, huh? It really seems like that should work, right? If the documentation very specifically points out that it does. Let's, yeah. View settings get terminus view dot tag. Oh, maybe this is, I may be misinterpreting what this actually does. Whoa, don't do that, dude. Thank you. Let's do it this way. v.settings get that for v in window views, because I have a feeling, and I was kind of confused by this the other day as well. None in any of these views, huh? Even though that one theoretically has a tag associated with it. The idea that we're working towards here is the idea of something that you could use to send code to a terminus shell and have it actually create the shell if it doesn't exist, start it up, and then shoot the stuff over. Then make sure that it always has, say, a new line on the end, probably configurably in case you want the power of sending just individual things, and then focus it after you've sent it over there. But in order to do that, you have to be able to find the thing. And in the video that I posted, I was doing that by the title of the window. Quit. I always forget how to quit Python. But that sort of rolls out the window. I wouldn't want to do something that requires such an explicit setup per se of a specific name. So that's sort of an unfortunate. I'm really surprised that that doesn't actually seem to. Actually, now that I think about it. Is this a thing we can do now? If we spell things correctly? Yes, yes it is. I totally forgot. Well, I didn't totally forget that that was there, but I haven't come up with a reason to actually want to do this yet. So thanks, Ben. I believe you were the one that put this thing in place. Super cool for something like this. I wonder if I should terminus view.tag none. Well, I mean, I guess that would explain some stuff, wouldn't it? It's explicitly set to none, but why is it explicitly set to none? It doesn't seem like it should be explicitly set to none. Let me just do a little bit of this. Stick that back in there and spoop that out. Control Enter for that command. That seems cool. Let's open the user terminus settings like thus. Oh yeah, right, I already did that over there. Why is that not going? Let's put that there, and let's just double check in the actual terminus code. If I close that, because it really seems like terminus open. Incidentally, I think part of I suspect, I didn't investigate super deeply because I was crunched for time, that part of the weird focus issue I was seeing is because terminus open immediately defers itself to run asynchronously so that it can work without hanging while it setting things up. And I think that means that when it actually starts the process running and runs later down in here, the actual pre-window hooks and post-window hooks, they're all kind of running asynchronously. Ben says that was a fun one. As much fun as adding in the glow effect, or the soon to be seen sparkling effect, and a hidden setting that allows you to point your own shader in so that we can add some bump maps and really make our symbols stand out. I think you mentioned that was totally something that you talked about internally, but it seemed like it was too much stuff to actually get done for something like this. I'm not seeing why, if terminus open was given a tag, and this is where it tries to find an existing one if there wasn't one. And then it calls terminus activate with said tag. So I guess we could look at that command. Terminus exec stops you from using a tag specifically because it always puts stuff in the one panel, which is also why you're not allowed to specify a panel name. Panel name, incidentally, kind of acts like tag in respect to sending stuff to a specific panel down here in the chooser. So the build results are part of terminus exec using a very specific name. Activate. What does this do? It gives it a tag. So it really seems like that would do what you want, right? So I'm kind of confused about why it doesn't. Just double check. List shells, Python, open in tab. Actually, we want that other thing, right? Oh no, we didn't do it that way. We did it the this way. Oh, I know what I was thinking. Just to get a sense for what it actually does. Whoa, where's my mouse cursor? Oh shoot, does that actually work? No, I don't think it does. Let's grab the. We'll just do it the way we did it before. Oops. View.settings. Well, let's actually verify that that's the correct thing. And its tag ends up being none. So that's kind of unfortunate. That sort of puts paid to the whole being able to do that in a sane way. Does this have an example of a key binding that? Yeah, that should have been my clue that I was doing that the wrong way, right? Yeah, well, let's just take this key as an example. Control Alt W, and so what does this key normally do? I should probably have tested that before I push this key, right? Or I could do this. Do Control Alt W. That in fact does nothing there and nothing there. So, I mean, I guess for simplicity's sake, I'm definitely pressing it and it's not triggering. So it's not just me not being able to find the tag on that thing. So that's kind of an unfortunate level of short circuit on being able to continue with that operation. Anybody else have any experience with using Terminus and tags? I also note this some of that stuff changed in the last little while because my Sublime copy that I use for screencasting and videos on the other channel has all of the packages, or sorry, it's package control set to not automatically upgrade packages because I kept ruining takes by having it pop something up and tell me that there was an upgrade when I didn't expect it to. And things didn't work until I updated it. So that's always also a good reminder to always keep your packages up to date. Now I'm imagining this configuration should come from here. I don't think there's any other way to do that. Although interestingly, it seems to work as part of a build system because it definitely finds and reuses the view in a way that it doesn't if you're not actually using a tag. Maybe we need to specify it as part of the terminus open and it's not actually gathered from there. I have traced through the terminus code before to see how that works, but that's totally something worth checking, I would imagine. Speaking of, I have this idea that I need to hack into this a little bit to be able to apply the gutter to a specific build system that I'm using. Uh, I set up ESLint in a package that we've been working on in work for a while, and it triggered over 1,000 warnings slash errors. And never have I wished more that I could click in the gutter to fold things up and clean them out of the way while I was looking at stuff. Needless to say, I did not personally, I should say, I was the one that was looking into it, sort of proceed down the road of fixing that because it was a bit of a task. To be fair, most of them were uh, there's a lot, like probably 300 or 400 variables easy that are defined and assigned a value once and never assigned again that it complained should be set to const in TypeScript. But let's say, uh, I'm thinking, what's the logical way to do something like this if you needed to spawn the terminal first? Uh, but you also need to know if the terminal exists. So I guess something to test would be clearly starting it, putting the tag in that does not work. So let's save that. But what if we did that whole window terminus open? Did I do that in this window? Nope. Not for the first time do I wish that there was tab completion in the input widget of the console. Terminus open, and the args were, let's say the tag here is Python and the other one, config name. This beggars the question that you would need to configure your key binding to know what the config name is. Maybe then just use the same tag as you would for the config name. But if we did this, what if I did that thing now where I wish I did this? Now it works. So it doesn't pull the tag from the config, but it will pull it from here, which I guess makes sense after a fashion. If you were going to fire up terminals from the command palette, then probably you want them to be a well-known thing and you'd know what they are. But if it was plugin code, then maybe you want to be able to flag it as such. Let's do this. Let's say terminus view and with the tag name. Oh, and let's also provide a window. Let's say for view in window.views. Oh, window is window or sublime.active window to make sure that you can call it with a window that doesn't exist and it'll totally do something. If view.settings.get terminus view.tag, and I severely have to constrain myself for not trying to put 3 equal signs on everything because I've been doing so much TypeScript lately. So let's say we need to provide a config name that this is actually going to do something with. Whoops, don't do that. Yeah, we'll just name this config, and let's say it can't be none because we're going to infer a tag from the name of the config, and so we actually have to have one. We can't just select one, and we don't care about that part either. So we can say, no, I don't have to do that. Terminal is equal to terminus view for self.view.window and config, and terminal is none. Is this the idiomatic way to do this, or would you say if not terminal? I always like to be very explicit when I'm using none as a reminder to myself that it's not necessarily a true false boolean, but I expect it to be a specific thing or none. But I can never tell if that's the sort of thing that is more idiomatic or it should go the one way versus the other. I'm not, and Ashwin asks, what does it mean to send a string to terminus? Is it sending a string literally, or does it mean to execute that string as a piece of code? It actually just sends the text directly to it as if you clicked in there and, say, pasted it. And what happens after that is a direct consequence of what it is that you happen to be running. So in this particular case, if you pasted in this, and we'll see what happens. If I paste that, I have to hit enter to get it to give me the error. But if I copied it this way so that I get the new line as part of the copy, then when I paste it in, it runs it automatically. That's not anything that Terminus is doing. That's just how shell programs tend to work. The input that they see as enter can come from a file or from the keyboard, or in this case, from the clipboard. In Python, you absolutely need to check explicitly for none. Is that the empty list is also falsy, as is empty string and zero? Yeah, I tend to use the shortcut for that if I know that I'm going to have a list. Like explicitly, I definitely know I'm having a list and I only care if it has something. I'll say if blah, but it's good to know that this is the way to pull this sort of thing off. And it's all of the Python that I've done has been a result of doing plugin stuff here. So if there's some explicit style guide other than the PEP guideline for Flake 8 that aligns this sort of stuff up, I've never really read it, but for working with, and maybe it's just because, as a C programmer, you tend to be more defensive about whether or not your pointers actually are set to anything before you start dereferencing them and blowing things up. I just sort of have a habit of assuming that none is kind of like that, even though it's not, or null in TypeScript, and I always do a check for that sort of thing. We're going to say terminus open, and the arguments we're going to give are, again, I have to look, config name of config and tag of config, like so. And if you weren't here for the first part of the cast, this is the package control website, but I'm totally using this dark reader plugin, which was mentioned in the last stream, and if you have never tried it, it is pretty cool. This is entirely just the default. The only thing I did for my install was flip this so that things are only dark if I specifically say I want them to be, and otherwise they're normal, which I think is the reverse of how it normally works. But by and large, I want to make some things dark and not everything dark. But I didn't fiddle with any of the brightness contrast or any of those things. I did fiddle briefly with these different methods for coming up with what colors should be used, and dynamic definitely seemed to be the best of all of them. So if you're like me interested in having something that's less eye glaring than pure white on some web pages, and it does seem to do an excellent job of making sure that you can actually read the text. Particularly in this dynamic scheme, I would recommend this thing. It's a Chrome thing. I assume there's something similar, or maybe it works for other browsers, but I tend mostly to use Chrome, largely for historic reasons, because for a long time Firefox didn't work correctly on Linux and it wouldn't load pages unless I sat there and moved the mouse over top of the window to make sure that events were firing. But that wasn't a bug. That's just something that I happened to be seeing on my computer, and I was the only person in the world. So I gave up on using that browser a ways back. I think they probably fixed it again since then, but uh, I never really got back into doing stuff. Um, Now, here's the tricky part to this. If the terminal doesn't exist, do that. Otherwise, do this. Let's just comment this out for the time being. Um, that means that if this wasn't here, in theory, when I do this, well, I guess, oh, maybe I should have pressed only the correct keys. I didn't actually update my key binding. Right on. I called it config, right? And the config is Python. We probably want to have, oh, you know what? Let's do it this way. I'm going to do that. And over here in the actual command itself, you definitely need a config, and we can say tag equals none. And then we can say tag equals tag or config. And then it'll infer it if you don't provide one. But if you want to have multiple Pythons running in this particular example, you could definitely tag them with something unique if you created an appropriate key binding for it. So now that that's in place, hitting that key, I would have thought would do a thing. Did I break it somehow? I'm guessing that it actually isn't correctly. Well, let's just do this. No, actually, this command wouldn't be running, would it? It would be running. It wouldn't be running. Would it be running? Where's the T? Is this actually doing anything? Is this one of those nights where I didn't drink enough coffee in order to get this operation going? All right. Oh, it needs to have some selected text. Right. Did I not do that? There we go. We broke it real good. Phew. All right. So let's just not be an idiot about things that are methods and not properties. Uh, Did I do that in more than one place? Did I not save this? Oh, I did it up here too, like a fool. Honestly, maybe I need a customized linter to let me know when I forgot to put a bracket after a window, the word window, in any Python file that doesn't have self dot in front of it because it's inside of a window command. What now? No, wait, that actually was a thing. What the hell am I doing? Well, now I'm just confused. And self window run command. Oh, wait, this is actually, no. I was thinking while I was doing this that I should swap this to be a window command and then just use active view for the other part. And I got 50% of that came out before I actually did it. So there we go. Now, I guess the question becomes, what happens if you call send string to terminus open immediately after that part happens? Why self.window? There's no window method in the class. Self.window would work if this was a window command, but it's a text command. So I did it that way. Like I said, as I was typing this, I was thinking to myself, I'm using self.view.window so often in this thing, I should either hoist it to be a variable at the top so I don't have to keep calling it all the time, or make this into a window command. It was originally a text command because it was easier to do this part where it gets the active view, but maybe it should actually be a window command, and then I could just call self.window.activeView to get the active view and grab that, because I don't actually need to modify this buffer. I just need to grab the selection. And while I was thinking that part in my head, I wrote part of that as if I had actually done that when in fact I had not. Um, so let's do that, and I'm gonna throw, well, I guess we'll go down here because it's, oops, a little bit nicer. The theory is, and I want to see what happens here. It seems like it's probably not going to do what we want. But if I hit Control Enter here, there's not a Python view, so it should try to create one. What happens if you call terminus send string with a particular tag and the terminal's not ready yet? Will it queue that input and then send it when the thing's actually done? Or will it fail and then we have to have some sort of contrived delay? And the answer is maybe that second one. And I got a lot of commands going in here, so let's go ahead and turn that off again. I never added that to the menu, did I? I have a thing on the scraps repository that adds the ability to toggle logging on and off from inside of the context menu there. Just to double check now, if I did it again, hmm. Oh, I guess I should remove that bit out of there because that's part of the older version of this. Mhm. Local variable view referenced before assignment. Is it now? What part of that is using view in terminus view? Oh, this is happening inside of terminus, right? That's interesting. Random thought. I wonder how glow style would look for diff markers in the gutter. That'd be kind of neat. Not gonna lie, but it would also be kind of cool if there was two levels of glow, like glow 1 and glow 2 with a slightly different halo, and then I could have some sort of hacky plugin that swaps between them on an interval, and then the text might look like it was pulsing a little bit to help draw attention to it. uh, I come up with off the deep end ideas. So weirdly, this is failing directly inside of terminus. I was not expecting that to be the case. Let's do a little log here, so we can say creating a new terminal. Whoops. Terminal already existed, and one of those. So if I select some text and hit the key, it opens the terminal, and in the console, oh, it's just doing it all the time now. Oh no, I've tried it still. Right. Okay, let's just comment that out for the time being, because I had this, the theory I had there was, I've noticed in the past that if Terminus runs into a problem, sometimes you have to actually reload the whole package or quit and restart to get it to unstick itself. Maybe that's better now, but back when I did the video on using Terminus in a build system, I discovered that uh, if you put an argument in there that it doesn't like, it gets mad about it, and then it tends to remember that it got mad about it and continues to not work in weird ways until you reload. There's been some updates since then, so that may well have been fixed. So it created it, but it did nothing. And now if I do this again, terminal already existed. So it's definitely finding it okay. Um, so what if we did this just as a test to make sure that this part still actually works? Um, so I do it the first time and it says it's creating a new terminal because there wasn't one. If I do it again, it's still doing that. Okay, now just to verify, I'm going to quit and restart. Wait for it to spool up. I don't necessarily trust that that restarted, so I'm going to do that. Well, I gotta say I'm a little confused by that one. What if I did it manually? Or maybe, was it a window command in here? Yes, it was. The default is false, only relevant when tag is none. So we don't even care about that. We just care about there being a tag. That part seems to work. Without the tag, it would just send it to the very first terminal in the window. It's kind of unclear what that means. Does it find panels before it finds views? So if we did window.run command and that and oops, and well, just that just to see. Oh, and it actually focuses it too. So that tended to work. That works. So what's different about this that it doesn't work here, but it does work here? I don't see anything immediately obvious about that other than the string is technically different, but I can't imagine that that would matter all that much, would it? Let's just verify that part anyway. And with that text copied, I guess the tag was different. Oh, I didn't change the tag there. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm not surprised that doesn't work. I wonder, that is probably at the root of the issue. We need to close that and restart it now because it definitely doesn't exist in there. So that time it decided it needed to create it, and this time I decided to create it. That's unfortunate. Oh, I guess we should probably fix that part too, huh? Great shades of my day earlier today. Okay, so that works. So I guess I don't know that I would necessarily call it a bug per se. And maybe it's just a personal thing, but if I ran this command and I told it to send the output to a tagged view that doesn't actually exist, I would probably expect that it does nothing if there isn't such a view, but it seems weirdly distracting that it triggered an error in here instead of just doing nothing or displaying a message that says not found. The fact that this says unbounded local variable view referenced before assignment makes it seem like this is definitely not even checking to see that it got a result or that it got inside of a part or something along those lines. Um, but I wonder if that means now that the thing we tried to do before might potentially do something now that it's actually correct. So can I create the terminal and send text to it at the same time? And that is still a no. Oh, and that also triggers that particular problem. But now that that's done, it works. So we need to actually check that, only do this part if the thing actually existed, right? So if we told it to open, then don't do this part right away. Defer it until it actually opened. And one way to do that would be to use set timeout, right? Um, with a timeout value. But the first thought that comes to mind is how long does it take the view to actually become available for us? Um, Clearly, it's not instantaneous, so that's a good indication that that's not necessarily a good way to do it. Because if you have to guess at how much time then it takes, then better than even odds. You try with 5 milliseconds, it doesn't work. You pump it up to like 20 milliseconds, it does work. Works on your computer, probably not going to work for anybody else. So that's not a good idea. But at the same time, we could um, actually have it defer until terminus view actually says that there's a view and then it knows it exists and then this command will work and it can do it. And Ashwin is saying, I think I should try terminus again. I used it at one point and went back after some time to a dedicated terminal tool. I definitely go both ways with Terminus myself. I know some people absolutely insist that their terminal has to be inside of Sublime so you don't leave the window. Uh, some people absolutely insist that a terminal outside is a better way to go. I'm sort of straddled the line. Like clearly, if I want to do something quick, this is the thing that I would do for it. I use Terminus for some uh, builds that might be interactive or need a little bit of uh, what's the like curses type manipulation of the screen, moving the cursor around because standard build systems are just sort of a dumb output. I'm not saying that they're stupid, but they just literally take the text and splork it out. So you can't do stuff like rewind back to the start of the line and overwrite it again. So some things really benefit from that. But for some things, I do indeed just have a terminal open on another window or on another desktop, I should say, that I quickly switch to run repeated commands. Um, so yeah, it is definitely a very handy tool. Um, I would go so far as to say that for myself personally, for all of the hard work that Randy put into this, if he decided he wanted to charge a little bit for it, I would totally pay. Probably see if he has some sort of donation-y type thing and just sort of, buy him a coffee or something. Speaking of, so uh, let's say we want something like this. Um, and we're going to need to know a tag, right? Now, and Ashwin says, by the way, we're almost reaching a year anniversary for Sublime 4, only 9 days left. Can't believe it's already been a year since I joined the community. I was boggling at that myself. Like, I know that it was November-ish when it happened initially, and that was the point where I was getting ready to actually do what has become plugin 101, and I thought, no, there's a new plugin host. There's going to be some new stuff happening. I should sort of wait on that. And the hilarity of this whole thing is that I happened to ask John at the time, just ballpark estimate, how long do you think that this is going to be a private thing before it goes public? Just thinking of the idea of having a video ready to go on the channel because it seems like a good opportunity to get exposure. And at the time, his guess was probably a couple of weeks. But as we can see, it's been longer than that because I think just because there's been so much stuff going into it and iterating on it. And which is absolutely fine for me, but it really underscores why I chuckle when someone says, why can't you give us a release date? Tell us when it's going to be done. It's okay if it's not right. We'll be patient. And no, you won't. If you think that there's a specific day, you're going to be marking X's on the calendar until that day arrives, and then you're going to be sad when it's not there. On the other hand, if you purchase the license, then you could totally be using it right away if you absolutely positively had to use it. I was also kind of chuckling today in response to the tweet about uh, the latest version of Sublime Merge going live. Um, there was a lot of people commenting saying you should be spending more time working on text and working on merge, and oh, sadly text is abandoned. And you'd really want to jump in there and say, no, it's not abandoned. There's been a lot of releases in the last year, but to know about it, you have to go on the forum where you'll undoubtedly see it mentioned, or in the Discord where you'll definitely see it mentioned, or on the issue tracker where you'll totally see it mentioned. So at some level, it almost seems like you have to willfully not look for is there information on new build in order to not know that there actually is one, which isn't technically true, but it sort of struck me as a funny thing, and I found myself wanting to put a comment and saying, actually, there's been 40 releases in the last year alone, uh, but I did not. What we're going to do here is we're going to assume we know that part works. So here we say self.doSend for the tag. And here we're going to think of the best way to do this. Let's just cancel that for a second. We add it to this, just sort of spitballing here, then this could defer itself anytime you call it and the terminal doesn't actually exist. So we wouldn't even technically need to do anything like that. And I don't know if this is necessarily the best way to pull something like this off, but I guess we need to find a way to, oh, yeah, okay. Just sort of thinking in my head here, we want to, in order to know at the soonest possible instant that the terminal is ready for us to send text, terminus view needs to actually be able to find a view, right? So if it this do send here needs to be able to know if there is actually a view with that tag yet. And one thing we could do is pass the terminal that we got to this so that it could say if it is none, then do something. Otherwise, proceed. We can go ahead and clip that part out for now. But what would this thing do? This thing would have to use set timeout to call itself again And as a part of that, it would have to call terminus view to actually find the view. So does it actually make sense to have this as an argument? Because we could just not, and then it could just call terminus view the first time. But um, this could also be we'll see what happens. And we want to call self.doSend, and we want to pass it. Oh, we need the window too. Hang on. Self.view.window. Okay, now's the time to do that because that's just going to be annoying if we don't, and that'll part will look nicer. And then we can do send. The first argument to this is going to have to be a call to terminus view, and the first argument it needs to get is the window. Technically, it doesn't need to get one. It could totally just pass none, and it would look up the active window. But the active window might change if it takes a second or two for this thing to start up. So it's nice for it to try to stay inside of the window that it originally started in. And tag. And then tag one more time, right? Does that look like it's correct? So we get the name of a config, we get the name of a tag. The tag is either going to be the one you provide or the name of the config, so you don't have to provide one, or you could if you want to have more than one and target keys. Look up the terminal. If there isn't one, then create one. If there was one, then we can just go ahead and call this, and it'll have the terminal value. If terminal is none, this will be none. When you call do send, it checks if terminal is none. And if it is not, I should say, it continues forward to send the string that is the current selection, which maybe should also be captured. And otherwise, it calls itself with a new invocation to terminus view to look up the new one. And I guess the other thing we want to put in here so that this doesn't spin like crazy is something like, I don't know, 100 milliseconds or something. So if it doesn't find it, if this is none, it will defer to check every 100 milliseconds. The other way to do this, I guess, would be to split a thread or spawn a thread, fork a thread, depending on the terminology that you like to use. I probably tend to use fork for that particular operation as a term. But that's still going to have to, in the background, pull this to be able to know, right? So is that level of stuff worth it for something as simplistic as this? That is a value call, I guess. Oh, I guess something else to check here. When we call terminus open, we can provide pre-window hooks and post-window hooks. So we could actually do the same thing we're doing in a build system if we wanted to inside of our key binding. So that's kind of a handy thing as well, I think. So I'm just going to hard code this in here. It's going to be that, and I think this is going to be an object. Is there an example of it? Because I already forget. No, it's going to be a list, isn't it? I think it's going to be a list. Yeah. Boop, boop. I always get, if I used chain of command more, I think this is how chain of command works. So carry file to pane, and the arguments are going to be direction right, for example. Ben says it's been ready in a couple of weeks for the last year. Personally, I've considered it released all this time. Uh, in For all of the builds that have existed of this, I'm pretty sure I've just been using it as my main editor since the very beginning. And the only problem, I think there was like one or two cases where we had to flip back to the previous build because there was something that was causing a crash, but in almost all or maybe all of those cases, the fixed build came out later the same night, like while I was sleeping or the next day. And the only other thing that comes to mind as something that was broken for me personally was when the glow didn't render properly and I had to turn it off. But I've considered it, ready for prime time for my own purposes. But I know there's a lot of people that really put a lot of stock into it being listed as a stable build, which realistically just means that uh, it's being tested officially enough or unofficially enough. It's been around long enough, and people haven't been complaining about super obvious problems. I'm not entirely sure what the metric for something like that is. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. In theory, because everything being what it is, I'm gonna select it this way so I get a new line. When I hold down Control and press Enter, a new Terminus window springs into existence in this pane, shuffles itself over to the pane on the right, and executes the code print test, and then test appears. Let's see what happens when I actually do it. Whoop! Cue the cheering. Incidentally, I looked into what it takes to get access to stock video footage for adding B-roll to videos to maybe jazz it up a little bit when I'm talking and I don't have something to display in the window to the right of me. But it turns out those are very prohibitively expensive. So I imagine that you have to be popular enough to be making enough money off of your videos so that you can afford to make the videos that people would watch enough to make you popular enough to give you the money to make the thing in the first place. It seems like a funky catch 22. But by the same token, I don't think that that's necessarily my style. But I did look into it for the video where we talked about manual installation of packages, and I mentioned that the people that vet packages for package control are all volunteers. I wanted to have stock footage of people cheering in the background, but I was unable to come up with uh, anything that wasn't going to cost like $50 or higher for the right to use it. Anything that I could find was free was like one person slow clapping, and that did not at all fit the vibe, and it didn't look right to speed it up and have 30 copies of the same person. So just to verify something here, I'm going to do this. Close that. Because I'm curious how many times we might see that text appear in here when this triggers. So that's not too bad. In this particular case, it took 200 milliseconds for this to fire up. So that seems like we chose a good value. And of course, that would probably be a smaller number if your computer is super fast, and a longer number. But polling at a rate of 100 milliseconds doesn't seem super terrible to me. I think we use a shorter timeout than that for our network code. As a matter of fact, uh, the actual the actual network thread itself. Uh, oh, that's right. That's not in this particular thing. This does a whole different action altogether. What package am I thinking of here? That's YouTuberizer. We're talking about Sublinet. Or no. Yeah, that one, I think. I bet you I have the select on this set to 1/4 of a second, so about 250 milliseconds. And that is pretty snappy too. I've done a lot of stuff where the timeout on a select call is a lot faster than that. This one's in here, and it doesn't even need to be because this thing actually does nothing unless there's actually somebody connected. But or there's always at least one socket because it's broadcasting itself. So I think that is actually not too shabby of a thing as an example of how you might do something like that. Now, I guess the last thing is uh, the idea of this. If I had this text selected, it sends it over there, but it doesn't actually run it. I personally like the idea of that. Um, but is there an actual use case for not doing something like that? For always wanting it to execute the current thing? I've done stuff like this in the past for sending text to a database engine. In fact, I think in the scraps repository, I have an example of a build system that captures the selection and stores it into a file and then executes a program with that file. So this is an even different way of doing something like that. Um, but we could easily add an argument in here for that, right? Um, let's say this. I want to test a theory here. Oops. Maybe don't make that one a string. I'm going to guess that it's okay to pass none as a value for that if one's not actually provided because Terminus is doing that on its own internally anyway, right? And similarly for this one. So let's cut that. Whoops. Cut that. Now we're getting into the ugly zone here. What's the nice way of formatting something like this? Do you indent it an extra thing? I always kind of err on the side of that one. Whoops. And then we want I guess an unfortunate no, this is different. This is interactive. This definitely wouldn't do what you want if you expected there to be multiple terminals because the focus gets all funky that way. But for something like this, where you're going to be reusing it, I think that actually makes sense, right? So that should work exactly the same as this works now. So just selecting this text should still theoretically, uh-oh. Oh, it does have a problem with that, does it? But how? Uh, non-type object is not iterable. Line 227. So does this not get null as the default value for this? Oh, it's a empty list. All right. That makes sense then, I guess. And I guess it's now this is that thing where if we put this array in the argument list, you might think that it always gets an empty list, but it doesn't. It actually gets one list and then Uh, if that got modified in any way, that would be this in the argument list for the next pass through, right? So I don't think that's going to be a problem here, and we could probably do that. But I kind of like the idea of this instead, just to make for absolute certain that it's going to do what we expect it to do. The other thing that we could do here, now that I'm thinking about it, which is actually even, what if we just took keyword arguments and any arguments you provide to this other than edit, it just shuffles along. That would probably provide the maximum level of action here, wouldn't it? Because then you wouldn't even need to create an entry for it in here. It could just be right in your key binding. But if you wanted to, you could actually do that. So I think as an ultimate, plus it also makes this part nicer. We would need what? KWRs like this. And we only needed the config for that purpose. I guess the issue with this, such as it is, if we do this, is we need a way to have a tag so that we can find the view. If tag and keyword args. No, I wouldn't probably do that. The default value, if there isn't that, is going to be what? I'm imagining, based on the way that this is implemented, that the tag can be pretty much any text you want, right? As long as you're willing to do something with it. Now, in this particular case, we probably always want to provide it. So one thing we could do is say that no matter what, you absolutely have to provide a tag, but you could also provide any other terminus arguments you want. And then we don't have to worry about that. So we could do something like this. And tag absolutely has to be provided. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And our key binding here is totally providing a tag, so that will work. And then when it comes time to call terminus open, we would need to say kwrgs tag is equal to tag, and then a little bit of that action so that it runs the command with those arguments. Does that seem like it makes sense? I think it might make sense. So our key, let's move that over there. Our key binding right now is specifically saying config. That's going to be something that doesn't actually work. So we would actually need to swap that for, you're in here somewhere. I know you are. Config name. If we wanted this to continue working, this would have to look like this. We absolutely have to provide that, and this doesn't need to have a value. So just for giggles, if we did that and this wasn't in here and there was some text and I hit enter, it's missing that. So it absolutely requires that, but this is still working the way we might like. And then we don't even have to use that, and we could say command is Python and -I, like this. Then we don't need that. We still need that. We still want to carry it to the right. We could even say title is Python REPL, like this. And we'll go ahead and close that one for now. And this should still do the exact same stuff, right? We'll maybe just send one little bit of bogus stuff in there instead of a bunch. So it has created the view and sent the text over there. Does this completely obviate Sublime REPL as a package? I don't know. I've never actually used it, but this is actually kind of a pretty cool like operation here. We could even take this one step further, obviously. Um, and it sort of becomes an operation for would you like to send multiple selections out to a command? Should it concatenate them together? Should it send them one after the other to execute? Then you wouldn't need to have num selections. Maybe you don't want to have selection empty and then it infers that it should send the whole file over instead of just one thing. In which case, we definitely want to make sure that, um, oh, yeah, that does sort of cause an issue. Policy for this, close that one for now because we don't care. We'll leave that one open for now. This is actually looking pretty good. This could actually just be a member thing now. It doesn't necessarily need to be out here per se. All that's going to do what we want. So we could say span equals view.cell0. Oh, actually the other way around. Sublime.region 0 and len self.view if no, I had that right the first time. Oy. That one if self.view.cell because it has a bool thing on it that will make it this is true or false, kind of that thing we were talking about in the channel earlier, depending on whether or not there's actually any selection. Otherwise, do that. And then this would be the span. So now we can select just this text, theoretically. I broke it. Uh-oh. Oh. How about that? Okay. So that totally gets sent, and it's actually selecting the new line there, so that's interesting. If I do the selection, I get that, and I'll go up there and just sort of run that. If I hit it in here where there's no selection, I would expect it to send both of them. Why is that jumping around like that? Is that still, no? Hmm. I've typed this more today than I have in the last week combined. Okay, so it's kind of doing the right thing, but in the wrong place, or in the wrong. The span of text is the first selection if there is a selection. Oh, shoot, I did that wrong, didn't I? I thought one of the naive solutions for this was to create a temporary file with selection, run it in Terminus, and then delete the temporary file. That also would work. As a matter of fact, if I did this, I'm pretty sure I have something for this already. If we look in, although I don't know if I actually put it in here. I don't think I did. But actually, on the other channel, there's a list of, I think I have a video that has some build systems and that has it in it. I quit and restarted Sublime since the last time I checked this operation. I'm going to guess this video, just a guess, I haven't actually double checked it, has examples of, I pasted a link in the chat, by the way, if you happen to be watching the video part and you don't have the chat open right now. It should be an example of, or a link talking about it, and then it'll link to another video of advanced custom build systems that override exec, and one of them was the idea of grabbing the selection, storing it in a file, running it, and spitting it out. Pretty sure, because it was a very, back when I did that, it was one of those questions that seemed to be coming up on the forum like 3 or 4 times in a month after months of never having said anything. I did this part wrong. It should be this if, like this. I think. Double check that. There we go. Unfortunately, there's no trailing new line in there, but that will totally send the whole file over, and then you could go and run it. We could also have a second key binding here. Shift plus Control plus Enter. What does that normally? Does that normally do anything? Line before. All right. That's not one I normally use. I normally use Control Enter to go below, and the list of things that you should not do with this package include that. So one thing I would do here, oops, is say that the key should be selector and the operation should be equal, and this should be source.python to make sure that this only executes in the appropriate file, because that's normally what I use this for. If you're unfamiliar with that particular key binding, Control Enter will just add a line below and jump the cursor there no matter where you are, so it's very handy to get below. And I think I've even seen someone create a version of this that jumps to the end of the line, inserts a semicolon, and then does that so you can finish up a line, which is kind of like something that IntelliJ and other JetBrains tools have, because they have such deep knowledge of the code that you're editing. They can actually like fill out the rest of the line necessary to make it valid. Like you could have the name of I think you could have the name of a method that you're calling and just hit Control Enter, and it'll automatically populate in some default arguments for you to fill out, kind of like a snippet. Been a while since I used that though, roughly 4 years, because I ditched it for Sublime. We could have a similar thing here. Oh, that's actually a command that we're executing, right? Terminus send string. Yes, so this could actually be terminus send string. And then we need some, how did I do that there? The args would be the actual string, like this, and the tag would be Python in this particular case, because that's what we used above, and we don't need that one. And then anytime you push Shift Control Enter, it enters a new line up there. So you could stage up portions of code by saying, I want this one, and I want this one. This part isn't going to work. And then Control Shift Enter actually executes it, which could be a handy way to go as well. So that's sort of a nice thing. We'll copy that and paste it in here too. Let's say we don't actually care about that part, and we're running pretty close to the end of the thing, but this is sort of fun to work on. So we'll go a little farther. This should be smarter about how it's choosing it, or at least not this ugly. But let's say it can send multiple selections if there are multiple selections. Now, how would we do that? We just need to iterate this once per selection, right? So the question in that case becomes, let's get rid of this thing too. Do we still want to have the idea of using the whole file and sending a whole file over there? And I can see this working in three ways. First, no, never. Um, or we could say, yes, do that, but only if there's exactly one selection and it's empty. So as long as there's any selection or two selections, then don't do that if there's an empty selection. Or if there's one or more selections, which I guess there's always at least one, but there could be more. Check all of them. If any of them are empty, then use the whole file. Otherwise, just grab the text for each selection, assuming it's not empty, and ship it away so that you could say, I want the whole file, or I only want this, or I want this and this. But if you had this selected and then an extra cursor, this one's not, this one wouldn't cause it to grab the whole buffer because you already sent one line. I don't think that's something that a person would want to do. I think it would be more likely that you accidentally do this and shoot a whole bunch of stuff out just because something happened to exist there. Um, but yeah, so any would be something for that, right? Let's check this. Ooh. Let's turn that off because apparently Terminus does a lot of stuff behind the scenes. We did that. We can see this, well, the selection, but not any particular information about that thing, right? Does this do anything interesting? No. What was I thinking here? Cell.size for cell in view.cell. So that one's 0. That one's something. So we would be able to pull that, right? And then we say we don't actually care about the size. We care about this being empty instead. So the first one's not empty, but the second one is. Now there's only one, and it's definitely empty. There's two, and they're both definitely empty. So there's that. So then we modify it one more time to say any for that. And I don't think we need to put that part in there. I think we can do this. Are any of the selections in this buffer empty? Yes. Are any of the selections empty? No. There's two of them. Well, are any of them? No. But if there's one of those and that one, then yes. And this is kind of one of those examples of I'm pretty sure that I know how to do that, but it's a lot easier to just play with it in the console and narrow it in on what you want, and then you're good to go. So we can say if any, well, in self.view.cell, then we want to grab the whole buffer. Whoops. So let's say spans in that case will be equal to sublime.region0 len self.view. So we're going to create a list of spans, and if any of the selections are empty, it's just the whole file. Otherwise, it's going to be all non-empty selections, right? So we, I guess, need a empty list because I don't think a list comprehension can. Would it actually drop one out? I suppose it would, wouldn't it? We could say cell for cell in this if not cell.empty, right? So that should provide something, and that should still only provide the one, but that one should have two, even though there's three selections. So make that part a little bit nicer. We make sure we change this to self.view.cell, and then we're good to go. And the idea here being that whether there's one thing or many things, the rest of the code is easier if you can say for span in spans. And then if there's only one, it just does one. So in theory, oops, it sends them both out. And I guess, does it also make sense that if you're doing, should we be inserting our own new lines onto these strings as we're putting them in there? What would you expect to happen if you selected both of these lines like this and hit enter? Would you expect them, in the case of this Python thing, to both run, or would you expect them to stack up like we're doing right now? Because we could make this force a new line on the end if there's more than one span. We could have the command take an extra argument for a separator to be used so that it could put like a semicolon in there. I don't know if that would actually work for the purposes of this though. I guess it would in the specific case of this. I don't know that you can rely on that in the general case. But then again, if someone's executing code like this, maybe they have a specific need in mind. So there's that. I don't know what the best way to do something like that might be. I can see it working both ways. Of course, in my nerd heart of hearts, I kind of want it to be configurable enough that it could do both. It could put a new line on the end of everything, or it could assign an arbitrary string to the end of everything. It might only do it if there's not already a new line or that character on the end. I don't know. That might be something that requires, I mean, I would imagine for the sake of completeness, you probably want to do something like that if you're going to do it, right? I would think that you either want to add text or you want to execute it, and you know there has to be a new line on the end of it. And if you wanted to send text and there wasn't one, well, you can use the other key binding. So Control Enter does that. Shift Control Enter tells it to run, for lack of a better term, and away you go. And as a matter of fact, this is actually very configurable because maybe there's some command, like what if this was a database thing and you were sending out SQL statements? You could make Shift Control Enter insert go semicolon enter, or however database things work. But on the face of it, that's actually, I think, a pretty handy something for this, at the expense of having to set this up and provide a tag here. But I don't think that's that terrible. Certainly from stuff that I've seen with people using Sublime REPL, it seems even more complicated to configure because it has menu file JSON that the plugin parses to pull stuff out. So you have to modify, I think, contents of the package, sort of. It installs itself unpacked to augment what the menu does. And if you want to use it in a build system, then you have to use a weird custom target that tells it to look in a menu file so that it can look stuff up. It's been a while since I looked at it, back when they tried to move Sublime to Python 3.3.7. and it didn't quite work out because of weird incompatibilities on Windows. There was there were problems with Sublime REPL then, and I remember looking into it a bit to see if I could see why it was wrong. And then also sometime after that, I think there was an API enhancement having to do with the resource catalog, and Sublime REPL was using the wrong path separator in some resources, and it worked. And their optimization in the core of Sublime stopped it from being able to find resources, and as a result, nobody running Sublime REPL could get it to work unless they manually configured some extra stuff. I think you had to modify the code to make it smarter. So that particular augment was rolled out. And ever since, I kind of had a little bit of a stink eye towards Sublime REPL because it's a very popular very popular project and package, but it hasn't been updated in a while, and a bug in that caused an update to the core to not go through. And that doesn't necessarily sit right. Um, but I think that is actually pretty handy. We are a little over the time, give or take. Just see, does this analytic actually mention anything about that? No, it's still kind of being a but. It doesn't necessarily want to tell me. Oh, there it is up there now. All right. Yeah, we've been. I don't know how long I double checked before I started. I said at the beginning, if you weren't there at the time, the YouTube live control room, which I run on my Mac over here, has a preview of what the live stream is going to be before you actually go live. And once I started the stream, it told me you're good to go live, but it showed me just the thumbnail in the preview. It wasn't showing me what I was streaming, and it took a little. I wasn't entirely sure it was actually doing anything until I actually told it to start, and then it started updating. And it's been kind of flaky, weird ever since. And also, apparently, my version of the browser on that particular machine desperately needs some updates as well. So I think this might be the point at which we say thanks so much for watching, everybody. Had a pretty good stream tonight. We're going to continue on with something more interesting next week. Remember, if you have any ideas for what we might talk about in one of these things, please do let me know down in the comments section below one of the videos here on the other channel, on Twitter, in the Discord, private message in the Discord, or on the forum. I am reachable in a lot of different ways, even on Reddit, although I haven't hung out there very recently. Uh, with ideas for stuff to talk about, topics, questions you might have about things. This particular thing that we just created today probably going to be in a video at some point in the future. So we're going to go ahead and call it there. Thanks so much for watching. Remember, you can use the buttons down below: thumb, subscribe, and share. Ring the bell notification icon. I have another channel. I do tutorials there. This is going to be something that eventually appears on there. And thanks so much for your support. I don't know if I mentioned it in the last stream. The other channel crested the 1,000 subscriber view, and it's gone even higher. Subscriber count, I should say. It's gone even higher since then, and I did not expect that to happen. Even this channel has exceeded the 100 subscriber level, which gives me some extra privileges with this channel that I didn't have before, which is pretty good considering I'm really terrible at self promotion. So with that out of the way, thanks so much everybody for watching, and until the next stream or the next video, this is OdatNurd asking you to please have a sublime day, morning, evening, night, afternoon, life. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that one.